Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, here today with another normal Audio Amigo review. Today we're going to be looking at yet another beautiful IEM from CVJ. This is the Aria Qimeng, or Qimeng, I really don't know. I'm just going to call it the Aria. This is essentially the Yukimi's little sister, coming in at an MSRP of $80 US. Like the Yukimi, this is also a single DD IEM, and it's also got some gorgeous packaging like the Yukimi. But unlike the Yukimi, this has some tuning nozzles and a good deal more competition in the under $100 space. So let's see what this one's all about. As usual, my quick disclaimer. This unit was sent to me by CVJ directly for review. I am not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell this IEM if I really wanted to, I have activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there is potential bias besides my own personal tastes at play. Thank you so much to CVJ for sending me this set, and thank you all for your support. Getting sent stuff like this is all thanks to you guys, and I really appreciate it. So let's kick things off by talking about the box contents. This is another fantastic unboxing experience from CVJ, and it's nice to see that you don't have to shell out $200 for the Yukimi to get this level of packaging. Inside the box, you'll find this lovely art card, as well as the IEMs below it, and in that sort of presentation area, you will find these tuning nozzles in a little slot, which we'll talk about later. You'll also get 6 sets of ear tips in individual boxes. You have these white ones and these black ones. They're really not all that different, but comparing them side by side and looking at them down from above, these clear ones have a bit of a different profile to them, but you get small, medium, and large of each. You also get a bonus set of the mediums of these black ones that come attached to the IEMs in the packaging. And you also get this case, which is very similar to the one on the Yukimi and things like the Aful Performer 5. The engraving on this one isn't as nice as the engraving on the Yukimi, but it's still a good-sized case. You know, it fits in a pocket nicely. Inside this case, you will find the CVJ Candy cable, which is sold separately for $30. You will also find the 4.4mm adapter, and you will find this little baggie, which has 2 sets of tuning foams in it. You get one sort of low density foam and a sort of either high or medium density foam. I say either high or medium density because there's a third set of tuning foams included, but they come pre-installed into these blue nozzles. Now, whether those are the medium density or the high density, I don't know, but you do get 3 sets of foams and 3 sets of nozzles to do the tuning. Honestly speaking, this is a pretty fantastic accessories package for $80. Yeah, you don't get a ton of ear tip options like some other IEMs do in this price range, but you essentially get a full-on tuning kit with the nozzles and the foam. So I still think this is an excellent accessories package for the money. So let's take a closer look at that good-looking CVJ Candy cable. This is a chunky 4-wire weave with what I can only describe as a cotton candy coloration going on. I really dig these colors. It's very different from a lot of other cables out there, even some of the aftermarket ones, which I think is a real good plus. The cable is a tad stiff, and it does exhibit some memory if you look at the way that it just lays there, but it's not horribly behaved, and you know, I can forgive it based on the looks. The cable is modular, and I showed you it comes with the 3.5 and the 4.4mm plugs in the package. This is the same modular system that was on the Yukimi and on the Night Elf. The connectors have nice CVJ branding on them. The Y split is sort of understated and doesn't have any branding on it. The chin slider is perfectly functional thanks to that rubber coating on the wires, and it didn't come loose during any walking. The 2-pin connectors are also metal, and they have the stereo blue and red stripes indicators on them to distinguish right from left. The 2-pin connectors, as you can see, slightly protrude out from the metal sleeve, and that's because these 2-pin sockets are ever so slightly recessed. Overall, I think this is a really, really nice included cable. The fact that CVJ is selling it on its own for $30, I think, is a testament to that. So let's talk build quality. Like on the Yukimi, these are CNC machined aluminum alloy shells with what is most likely a purplish blue electroplated coating on it. The nozzles, as I mentioned, are swappable, and they have different sizes of holes on them. If you look at them very closely, the gold and silver ones have slightly different diameter holes in the mesh compared to each other, and these blue ones, as I mentioned, have a damper already installed into it. As far as ventilation goes, you have 3 vents right above the driver in the sort of driver funnel, and you have 3 here on the sort of back of the IEM. I had 0 driver flex with these, so those vents are clearly doing their job. As far as the overall shape of these goes, they're basically your standard universal IEM shape. You do have a little bit of a bulge here to try and hold it in your ear a bit better, and you do have that, recessed wing area. I don't think it'll be a super problem for comfort. We'll discuss that later. The top plate has this sort of elegant, flowery, lacy, whatever you want to call it, design, and it does say Qimeng or Qimeng on there. These do say Aria on them, but it's up here next to the left and right indicator and the recessed 2-pin socket. These feel deceptively light for being all metal, but that's not really a bad thing. They feel nice and solid in the hands, and I would expect these to last quite a while. No clue how well that purple color will hold up over time in terms of the paint chipping and things, but if it is the same electroplating technology they use on the Yukimi, I would expect this to last quite a while. Let's dig into those specifications. So these are powered by a single dynamic driver with a nanocrystal coated diaphragm. Now, I don't know what kind of crystal they're talking about. Sapphire is a crystal, but you can also have carbon crystals and metal crystals, so I don't know what they mean from a technical standpoint. But even with fancy crystal diaphragm, this IEM is very easy to drive. The sensitivity of 110 with the impedance of 28 means that I had no issues driving these with older phones or older tech like my Minidisc player. As I mentioned earlier, the shells are quite light on these, at least compared to other full metal IEMs, and the nozzle lip on these is under 6 millimeters. So the 2 things together bodes extremely well for comfort. Overall, there isn't anything too standout in terms of specifications here, just your typical single DD set. But now it's time for the cool wall. So right off the bat, I need to say the cool wall does take into consideration the cable and how it pairs with the shells. That being said, I really think this purple-blue color is just really good looking. It's pretty awesome. It's different from other colored shells of other IEMs that are out there. I do think the design on these shells is maybe a bit too subtle, a bit too plain, but the color of the shells and that little bit of white accent, I think, pairs amazingly well with the cable. And as soon as you put the cable into the mix, I think these honestly look pretty cool, so that's where I'm going to put them. So, I'm betting these actually do pretty well with the Council of Ladies, so let's check in on what they think. Right off the bat, 4 pretty and 1 meh, only our famously fastidious lady number 4 holding out in this case. Let's see how that translates to compliments. 3 to 2, 3 for, 2 against giving out compliments, so a pretty good chance you'll get a compliment if you ever decide to wear these out and about. And finally, let's check in on their thoughts. Looks like they like the cable. It gives, sort of girly pop energy. And they also picked up on the cotton candy color. So, yeah, overall, I think the ladies vibed with the cable. The shells, maybe not so much. So let's get on to the comfort. Recipe is looking pretty good. You've got relatively lightweight shells, a conventional but slightly more ergonomic design with the bulge in the wing, and a sort of normal-sized nozzle that isn't enormous. For me, all of that adds up to an all-day comfort IEM for me. I was able to wear these for hours on end, no issues or problems, nice long gaming sessions. I will, however, do my usual warning on these, bulges and this sort of barely semi-custom shape. If you're going to grab these, make sure you get them from a store with a good return policy in case this design doesn't work well with your ears. But as far as Mrs. Audio Amigo and her tiny ears test goes, she actually passed these quite easily. She wore them all day at work, and she commented that the ear hooks here were a good radius for her ears. The nozzles were not an issue at all. She was able to form and maintain a seal easily, so they got a really easy pass on the tiny ears test. So we'll go ahead and start getting into sound, and we'll kick things off as usual with the bass. The bass presentation here I would describe as accurate and tight. The sub bass is a little light, but I feel like it's tactile enough. If you listen to sub-bass heavy music, I don't necessarily think you'll be disappointed with this presentation. Just don't expect as much rumble as you would get on something with a, deeper sub-bass, more of an emphasis in that area. Massive Attack's Angel, for example. It does rumble, but not as much as I would like at more moderate listening volumes. Those low notes in the intro, they alternate between 60 and 80-ish hertz, according to my spectrogram. Those are replayed pretty well by this driver. It doesn't struggle, it just doesn't emphasize them as much as, bassier sets would. And it's a similar story in terms of mid-bass. The iconic bass line in Fat Larry's band's Act Like You Know has good impact and really good presence. The kick drum doesn't get lost in the mix at all. I would say this is a very natural sounding bass with a very subtle mid-bass boost that pushes things just forward enough to stand out. I don't think this will satisfy bass heads, but in my opinion, if you put on bassier tracks, like I said, I don't think you'll be disappointed here. Moving to the mid-range, and here's where things get a little bit interesting. These overall sound to me like a bright sort of mid-range focused IEM, which at least in my experience isn't all that common at this price point. The lower mids aren't warmed up by the bass in any way because they're also boosted to match. It lends an overall warm, forward tonality to the mid-range in general. Rush's Free Will I thought sounded great on these. The bass, the guitars, the drums, they all sound very rich, very separated, very complex, and when you throw in Geddy Lee's vocals, the song I think really sounds fantastic on this set. I don't feel like Lee's vocals are negatively impacted by that warmth, and I would say that the same goes for sort of female vocals. Ikuta's vocals in Yoasobi's Idol are forward without being overwhelming, at least compared to the instruments and percussion in that song. The overall replay of that song I think is quite nice. The mids on this set are definitely the star of the show of this tuning. This set has really nice richness and depth to the mids. The separation is really nice, and there's really good emphasis on instruments here. That brings us to the upper mids and treble, and that's where these tuning nozzles come in. The blue nozzles here, in my opinion, offer the most subdued upper mid-range and lower treble experience. The gold nozzles here are a step above that, and the silver nozzles are just a tiny bit brighter than the golds, to the point where I would say the overall sound of the silver and the golds is essentially the same. Both of these nozzles put an extra shine on female vocal harmonics as well as percussion harmonics when compared to the blue nozzles. For example, in La Seraphime's Anti-Fragile, the vocal presentation generates a lot of upper harmonics, and while the blue nozzles have what I would describe as a little bit of an unnatural decay to some of those harmonics, where some of the echo and the things last a little bit longer than I would think, those harmonics, although they last longer, are in general more subdued than on the other nozzles, where they're more emphasized but maybe a bit more natural. The cymbals and percussion harmonics are a bit interesting. One thing I noticed was the bottle hits on Michael Jackson's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. They sound incisive and energetic how I expect them to sound, but the brighter nozzles have them pop forward a bit more. It isn't to the point where it's sibilant or piercing, but for treble-sensitive people, I think it maybe will be a bit much. The blue nozzles help, but the energy up here helps the overall sound signature lean a bit bright. I personally did not find these to be immediately fatiguing, but prolonged listening at higher volumes did tire my ears out a little bit, even with the blue nozzles. Something is going on in the higher harmonics that just didn't vibe with my ears super well over a long listening section. It wasn't like with the Yu Huanji where it was immediately piercing. This was more like a stealth fatigue that set in over a long time. The blue nozzles do help reduce that a bit, but it's present with all three. That flaw doesn't kill the set for me overall, but it does temper my love of that gorgeous mid-range presentation just a bit. Let's quickly talk about technicalities. I did my typical Steely Dan Black Cow echo test. The bass guitar at the beginning of the track was present, and while it wasn't as prominent, it still carried the detail that I expected to have with the ringing. The mid and upper end technicals are strong, as expected from a sort of mid-range focused, brighter tuning. The subtle ride cymbal that's going on during the chorus in Britney Spears' Toxic is present and clear, even in the moments when Britney's voice is sort of encroaching on it in the mix. This I feel is a very capable driver, and I feel that it's a good performer in the price range. Let's move on to stereo separation. As usual, I used Mediterranean Sundance for this test, and it performed well as I expected. This set sounds nice and wide. It gave the track plenty of room to breathe for both guitarists. In terms of perceived 3D soundstage, this set didn't hold back any well-mastered tracks in my listening. It was easy for me to place the different band members around me while I was listening to Dave Brubeck's Take 5, and while this set didn't give me any extra depth or sort of expansive scale to the mix, it also didn't, squash the track down to where I felt it was two-dimensional. I would say perceived 3D soundstage here is a bit above average for the price range. Okay, comparisons. This is where the review is going to take a bit of a left turn. The Arias here, to me, come across like a sort of mid-centric IEM with a bit of a bright leaning to it. And in all honesty, I don't have anything in the sort of $50 to $110 price range that even comes close to matching the tonality of these IEMs. So what I'm going to do instead is take a handful of popular IEMs in this price range and go over how the Aria sounds compared to them, even though it's going to be different. And then at the end, I'll bring in a special guest for something special. Let's go ahead and kick things off with the TRI Draco, priced at $60 US. At first, I thought this might be a similar tuning to the Aria, but after doing some comparison listening, it didn't match as well as I would have liked. I thought, it also has the warmer mids and that sort of old school sound, but it's actually more forward in the vocals than the Aria, and it's generally bassier. It has more sub-bass rumble and a bit more mid-range or mid-bass punch. The Aria has, those rich, warm mids, and I would say that these two, like I said, are more different than I initially thought. The Draco also doesn't have that little spot of slowly fatiguing treble that the Aria has, at least on my ears. So yeah, the Draco and their warm tuning, not really a match for the Aria. Next up, we've got the Kefine Delci at $75, representing the sort of warm V-shaped tuning. The Aria has a good deal less sub-bass rumble than this, but depending on the song, I feel like this might actually punch a tiny bit harder in certain parts of the mid-bass. I would say they trade blows in the mid-bass overall. The mids on the Aria, again, are much fuller, much richer, much, warmer, and also much more forward than on the Delci. The vocals on the Delci are more forward, and the Delci actually is a bit brighter overall, but despite that, again, it doesn't have that little treble spot for me. But again, these are different. The Delci is bassier and brighter, a bit more V-shaped. This is all about the mids with a bit of spiciness to the treble to liven things up. Representing the neutral tuning at an MSRP of $80, we have the Truthear Hexa. Another imperfect comparison. Yes, that is totally a Hexa box, trust me. The Hexa is a bit rumblier in the sub-bass, but this time the Aria consistently wins in terms of mid-bass punch. The mids, again, are warmer and richer than on the Hexa, and the Aria is lacking some of that treble energy and sparkle compared to the Hexa, but again, while the Hexa is brighter, it comes across as smoother and more controlled at the top end compared to the Aria. I also feel like this is a bit more resolving thanks to those balanced armatures in the mix. But again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I don't feel like the Hexa really provides a good apples-to-apples comparison. It's too tame in the mids to compare truly well with the Aria. And now, representing the bright tunings, we come to the $90 SIMGOT EA500 LM. The LM is a very similar story to the Hexa. The LM has more sub-bass rumble, less mid-bass punch compared to the Aria. The Aria, once again, has those rich, warm mids, but the LM is even brighter than the Hexa is. I do find the LM to be a bit fatiguing at higher volumes, but the top end, again, comes across as a bit smoother, a bit more controlled compared to the Aria. I do feel, apples to apples, that the LM has the better driver, but again, we don't really have a match in terms of overall tuning here. The LM is much brighter, and like everything else so far, has been more rumbly in the sub bass with leaner mids. So to summarize, none of the IEMs I've brought in here have really been a match for the overall tuning of the Aria. But here's where my special guest comes in. I have here the $350 Pinon Fan 3. And after about a day or two of listening to the Aria, this is the IEM that the Aria reminded me of, at least in terms of, the mid-range tonality. Listening to these two, the Fan 3 is straight up a way better version of the Aria. It's more refined. And I mean, it had better be. This is over 4 times the price. Like the rest of the options, this has more sub-bass and a smoother treble presentation than the Aria. However, the Fan 3 actually lines up and competes pretty well throughout the mid-range. Like the Aria, the Fan 3 has those rich, lush, warm mids with fantastic mid-bass punch. I'm not making this comparison to show which of these is better, because to my ears at least, the Fan 3 is the obvious winner. But this is where I think the Aria can be a bit interesting. If you can, make it past those troubling treble spots that will fatigue you over time, this is honestly an extremely affordable way to get a taste of that Pinon house sound. That's actually a pretty good segue, so let's see how the Aria stacks up on the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale. We'll start off by talking a bit about the accessories. The packaging and the included accessories on this set is extremely nice for a $125 IEM, let alone an $80 one. This cable is really, really nice. The ergonomics of the shell are good. The nozzles and the tuning foams result in a great way for people to customize their sound. And the sound is essentially a less sub-bassy version of the Pinon house sound. And if it wasn't for that slight treble spot in the treble, these would honestly be really, really nice. Like I said earlier, the treble spot in the treble reminds me a bit of the treble spot that I found on the Tangzhou Yuhuanji, but it's less intense here. On the Yuhuanji, I would hit a song that hit that spot, and it would be fatiguing, almost immediately. It was very piercing. On this, it's certain songs that you have to listen to over a prolonged listening session. And for that reason, and the fact that the sound signature is quite unique, and the fact that it comes with an amazing accessories package, I'm going to put this IEM in But I Like This, right next to its big sister, the Yukimi. I will say that, like with the Yuhuanji, your library and your ears might not care about that treble spot in the treble. And I say it's only a treble spot for me because it was there with all 3 nozzles, even the dampened down blue ones. One thing I will say is that this is not a sort of cheaper version of the Yukimi. The tuning is too different for that. So, am I going to end up recommending the CVJ Aria? Well, it has a unique sound signature, and y'all know me, I'm kind of a sucker for specialist/unique sound signatures. And over short sessions where that treble spot doesn't, rear its ugly head at me, it's honestly a really nice listening experience, especially if you like those sort of warm, rich mids. Who this is not for. This is not for bass heads. This is not for treble heads. If you're looking for sparkly, shimmering highs or deep, rumbly lows, you won't find them here. There is a bit of sparkle, and there is a bit of rumble, but it's more subtle than you would think, and while it's accurate, it might not be enough for you. This is also not for people who are looking for a neutral sound signature. Those, lower mids that I love so much, they're my personal preference, but there are a lot of people who prefer a leaner, more subdued mid-range with kind of a mid-bass tuck going on. So this isn't for those people either. Who would I recommend this for? I would recommend this to people who are looking for something different and who have a penchant for that rich, warm, mid-range sound that I like. I also think this is for people who might be looking to try the Pinon house sound, but are sort of on a budget. I know this tuning might not be for everyone, but like I said, I quite like the mid-range presentation, and the Aria can provide you a taste of that, higher dollar Pinon sound for under $100. I just wish that my ears didn't hear that slowly fatiguing treble spot somewhere in the treble. You might not hear that at all. You might not have songs that aggravate that spot, but I have to mention it because it's what I hear. But all right, that's going to wrap up my review of the CVJ Aria. Definitely a different sort of tuning, but I think different in a good way. If you like warm mids like I do, definitely worth checking out. I might do an addendum video where I play around with these foams and these nozzles, maybe try to double stack these, try and get rid of that trouble spot for me. But that's something for another day. For now, I'm going to say thanks again to CVJ for sending this out for me, and I'm going to go ahead and end the review here. Thank you all so very, very much for your continued support. I would not be getting samples like this if it wasn't for each and every one of you. So thank you all so much for watching. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch you all next time.